Okay, so we have a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
But let's start at the beginning. Just how did an immigrant kid from Korea go to leading an HIV department at the World Health Organization, being the president of Dartmouth, the head of the World Bank, and then parenthetically golfing with world leaders? Some of you may not know, golfed with Obama, Trump, others, and we're going to have to talk about who's more honest in their game. But at first, as a kid, what did your parents put in your Wheaties?
Well, I'm here because of a series of just incredibly, almost ridiculously improbable events. My father was a refugee from North Korea. He happened to know a border guard, and so snuck through the fence, literally, in the middle of the night at 19 years old. My mother also was a refugee. During the war, they lost everything, and they had to go to an island in the south, just off the southern coast of Korea. And so they were both good students. My father went to dental school. For some reason, just took it upon himself to learn English, and so he was a translator. Had an opportunity to study at the NYU School of Dentistry, and met my mother in New York at a Korean party, right? So my mother got to the United States because she was the top student in her class at the high school, which was the #1 high school in Korea. Wow. And they gave exactly two scholarships. So she came and they met, and the improbability started there and just continued. And so, grew up in Iowa. I tell people, as you can tell from my appearance, I grew up in Iowa. Just sort of led a regular Midwestern American lifestyle, if you can do that. And people just kept asking me if I'd be interested in taking on these positions. And I guess what I did was just said, oh, okay, sure, let me give it a shot. Okay.
So, well, before we get to those positions, I just want to get to this one piece, which is you were told that the HIV battle to save tens of millions of people in Africa and Haiti was impossible. And you did it anyway. So I just would love to understand why. And of course, since people thought it was impossible, there must have been challenges you ran into. How did you not feel defeated or deflated through that exercise?
Well, the person that I founded the organization with, along with others, but the person who most shared the path that I took was a guy named Paul Farmer. He unfortunately passed away in 2022. But we both studied anthropology and medicine. And we'd studied, the history of colonialism in Africa, of the very poor health outcomes that were existing in all different parts of the world. And we just committed that, look, we may never raise any money. We may always be on the side of the losers, of the poor, of the marginalized. But we're going to insist that we should give the best possible quality of care wherever it is we happen to be. So we started in Haiti, but then these opportunities started coming along. So we discovered an outbreak of drug-resistant tuberculosis, which is one of the most difficult things to treat of any disease. And we started saying, well, there's an outbreak in this community in Peru where we were working. We should treat these people. And the response that we got, I think, just made us even more determined, because not only the local Ministry of Health, but the World Health Organization said, do not treat these people. And we kept saying, but wait a minute, they're infecting their family members. We saw whole families that were losing half their members because tuberculosis is an airborne infectious disease. And the more the World Health Organization and the local ministry got angry at us, the more we thought, hey, we've got our finger on something here. They were saying that you're bringing attention to something that you shouldn't. It's too expensive. It's too complicated. And so we just said, okay, we'll take this on. And we began treating the patients and started getting really good outcomes. And as a result, over time, the policy at WHO changed. And from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we received the largest grant in the history of tuberculosis control, $45 million. And we turned it into a global movement that now, there are millions of people, well, probably not millions yet, but almost 1 million people being treated for this disease all over the world.
Incredible. Yeah, deserves a round of applause.
And by the way, I mean, I think some people here will remember, but you know, the situation for HIV. HIV was the most stigmatized disease in the world. The only time in history that something was more stigmatized than mental illness, which we're going to talk about. And when the new medicines were found in 1996, it was just amazing. You know, some people who were living with HIV had sold all their assets, and then they got these medicines, and it was, we called it the Lazarus effect. People coming to life who looked like they were dying. And so we thought, but wait a minute, 25 million, the vast majority of people living with HIV are in Africa. And so we need to find a way to treat them as well. And we heard exactly the same thing. It's impossible, it's too complicated, too expensive, you can't do it. So we took the exact same approach. We started treating a small group of patients in Haiti, and we showed the before and after pictures. Paul was taken by the great infectious disease physician Tony Fauci to the White House. He showed those before and after pictures to President George W. Bush's aides, and they looked at it and they almost couldn't believe it. And so they said, so are you saying it's possible? Yes, we said it's possible, we've done it. And then soon afterwards, President Bush announced his President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief that's treated 20 million people. There are now almost 20 million people in Africa getting HIV treatment. And right before that, everyone said it's impossible. In fact, the head of the US Agency for International Development, at a testimony in Congress, and you can Google it and you'll see it, he said, the guy who was in charge of aid for Africa and elsewhere said, well, you know, you can't treat AIDS in Africa because Africans have no sense of time. They have no watches. You tell them take a medicine at 10 or at 12. They don't know what you're talking about. They know morning, they know night, they know the high sun of noon, but they can't take the medicines because they can't tell time. He had just visited Africa, and the comment from the Africans was, well, Mr. Natsios came to visit us, and the only one who was late for every meeting was Mr. Natsios. And now it's seen as sort of incredibly racist because, in fact, the treatment outcomes in Africa are in many cases even better than they are elsewhere. And so we had to fight this incredible sort of locked-in sense that it's impossible to do these complicated things in poor countries. And so it was an amazing experience and really led to sort of all the other things that happened in my career.
I just want to take a second to just zero in on this, because this required just remarkable persistence, and I'm curious where that comes from. And I know what doesn't show up in your bio is the fact that you were an exceptional high school athlete, point guard, quarterback, now a scratch golfer, or a better, I think. No. So where did that, no?
Well, so you know, people get really impressed with the quarterback of the football team thing, but they usually fail to add that I was a quarterback of the team that had the longest losing streak in the nation, right? 56 losses over 5 years, and we kept that record intact. So maybe not, you know, having experienced things like that, I think made me feel that, you know, when people say you can't do something, right? Well, you know, let's see, let's really see. But it's also Partners in Health. The fundamental idea of Partners in Health was, even though we were not a religious organization and had people from every religion, we were inspired by the liberation theologians in Latin America who talked about something called the preferential option for the poor. We love everyone, but our preference should be to ask what's going on with the poor. And so if you do that, 25 million people in Africa living with HIV, I used to go around saying at WHO, where there was also a lot of ambivalence about treating HIV. I used to say to them, you know, just as Germany is remembered for the Holocaust, if we let 25 million people die because we think it's inconvenient, we think it's too complicated, we will always be remembered as the generation that let them die, right? So there was a very strong sense of moral responsibility in going forward, and that really buoyed us. When President Bush said essentially the same thing. I mean, you know, I've had the great privilege of meeting him and talking to him afterwards. And in fact, when I was at Dartmouth, we gave his father an honorary degree. And when I asked his father about it, I said, you know, just so grateful for what your son did. He wept, because he said, you know, we were so proud of him, and we knew he was going against the grain, but it's one of the proudest things that this entire family has ever done for public service. Yeah.
So just for us lay people who sit on various boards, donate in the healthcare arena, and donate to various causes. Lots of causes seem to be momentous and critical. And you've identified some, and you've touched every corner of public health through either Partners in Health or the World Health Organization, whatever else. When you look at it kind of in today's world, what do you see as the most challenging public health issue? Because I don't assume you're resting on your laurels. So what do you believe needs the most attention today? What's the cause of our time, and why?
So my partners, Harris and Steve Leibitz, where are you? You're in the audience somewhere, all the way in the back, okay. So, you know, it's almost, I feel like I should start with an apology, because I've worked on so many different issues, but one that I really haven't worked very much on is mental health. And you know, just to give you a sense of the scale of the problem, Harvard Medical School, Ron Kessler at Harvard Medical School and his colleagues at the Queensland, I've got it here somewhere, it was the Queensland Public Health Initiative in Australia, did a study of 150,000 people and tried to find out what percentage of just humans have a problem with mental health at some point in their life from 0 to 75. And it's half. Half of all people will have some problem with mental health at some point in their lives. If any of you are interested in the topic, Tom Insel, who was the head of the National Institute of Mental Health, wrote, I think, the best book on any medical subject on mental health called Healing. And in it, Tom says, well, actually quotes a study from the US government that says that people with mental illness experience a reduction in life expectancy of 15 to 30 years. So if you look at what's happened in medicine as a whole, advances in medical science have led to an almost 25-year increase in life expectancy in the United States, from about 55 years to about 80 years over a 100-year period. So people who have a mental illness are literally living in the 1920s in terms of their life expectancy, 20 to 25-year reduction in life expectancy. And so, and I started asking, what's going on? Why is this so terrible? Why is the outcomes so bad? If you read Tom's book, Tom says that of the people with serious mental illness, of those who are diagnosed, and there are many who don't get diagnosed, of those diagnosed, only 43% get any treatment at all. And of that number, only 40% of them get what he calls minimally acceptable treatment. So we're already down to 16%. And of the ones who get minimally acceptable treatment, about a third get fully better, a third have no effect, and a third are in the middle. So about 6% of people diagnosed with serious mental illness get fully better. And when I asked Tom, well, so what number could that be? With all the new treatments that are available, he thinks at least 50%. Now, if we went from 5% to 50% of people getting better, just like with HIV, the stigma, I think, would go down. So, you know, just looking at the numbers, it just, I was really appalled by the situation. And then I asked a really simple question. And that simple question was, so how do you manage the triage system in mental health? If you have a problem with your teeth, your dentist will say, well, you need your teeth straightened, so you need to go to the orthodontist. Or you need root canal, you need to go to the endodontist. It happens in every aspect of medicine except mental health. And I've asked, many of my friends are the leading psychiatrists, and I've asked them, why is there no triage system? And I just can't get a good answer, right? So it's broken in many, many ways. The stigma is real, and part of the reality of the stigma is that we just do so poorly in terms of treating people.
And I mean, obviously you've, to say defied the odds would be an understatement. I mean, but you did it with drug-resistant tuberculosis and HIV and Ebola. Do you believe this is a bigger challenge than any of the ones you confronted before?
It's a huge challenge because of, not only are half the people going to experience some problem, but as everybody in the field tells me, the people who are the sickest are the ones who are most likely to deny that they're sick at all. So it's very difficult to get people who have serious mental illness, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, to take their medicines because they think, many of them anyway, and Tom illustrates it in his book, they think they're okay. They think they're really, and that the medicines somehow have a negative impact. And it's too bad because there's tremendously, there's new medicines, for example, long-acting injectables that you inject literally once every 6 months that have had tremendously good outcomes, but only 8% of people in the United States get it, whereas in Europe, 40 to 50% get it. Right. So there's just a lot of potential transformative actions that we could take that for some reason just aren't being taken.
But how do you navigate those actions? I mean, you mentioned earlier that some of the issues are not diagnosed. Obviously the cost side of this, and even the medicine you reference, I suspect is expensive. So people don't know where to get the treatment. They don't have the triage. They don't even know to get the treatment. So how do you deal with it? Like, what's really possible with mental health?
So when we were working with HIV and tuberculosis, because we're talking about a patient population that absolutely cannot pay for their treatment, we had to go through the public sector. We had to find governments, organizations, the World Bank at some points, to pay for the treatment. So we had no choice but to go through the public sector. But there's story after story, and I've heard so many of them from people who are extremely wealthy, who had a terrible time finding the right therapy for their loved ones. One friend of ours told us that he'd been spending $500,000 a year trying to find the right therapy for his son. Right? And finally, after like 4 or 5 years, he found the right set of treatments, but that's how much it cost. Right. So what we're looking at is there some way where we can create a platform that would get people into the system and then follow them until they found the right kind of therapy that was most effective for them? It's just amazing that it doesn't exist today. And there have been some efforts in the past, even to create, say, concierge systems. But even those are not really functioning at this time, as far as I understand.
So I want to get into what the opportunity is, but just before we get there, in terms of what's actually possible with perhaps from the private sector, I just want to highlight, you went from the public sector and public health, academia, et cetera, and then you were called by Barack Obama, I believe, to interview for the World Bank role when you were neither an economist or a banker. So how did that happen? And then, obviously you got the job. Why did you get it? What unique perspectives were you able to bring to bear?
So I was president of Dartmouth College, one of the great Ivy League universities, minding my own business when I got a call from Tim Geithner, who at the time was Secretary of the Treasury. And Tim is a friend of mine. Both he and his wife were Dartmouth graduates. And usually the only reason he called me was because he had a friend who had a kid who was interested in Dartmouth. I literally had a pad of paper, and I was going to say, hey, Tim, just tell me, what's the name of the kid? I'll look into it. And Tim said instead, he said, no, Jim, how would you like to be president of the World Bank? And I said, you mean like the World Bank? He said, yeah. I said, I was the chief editor of a book that called for the closing of the World Bank. and he said, oh, I know. I said, that doesn't disqualify me? No. So can you come down and see the president? I said, like when? He said, how about tomorrow? Right? So they were in a bit of a rush. So of course I called the chairman of our board and said, look, I don't think I'm going to get this job, but it's President Obama calling, I should go. So I went there and went into his office, and of course, it's the Oval Office. He's got this unbelievable voice and presence. And so he looked at me and he said, so Jim, why should I nominate you, a physician and anthropologist, instead of a macroeconomist to be president of the World Bank? So I said to him right away, I said, well, President Obama, have you ever read your mother's PhD dissertation? Looked at me and he says, well, yes, I have. And I still don't know if he's actually read it. But I had read it, because when I saw him coming on the scene, he was just such an incredibly compelling figure. I learned that his mother, like me, had a PhD in anthropology. So I ordered her dissertation from the University of Michigan archives, and I read the whole thing. And I said to him, I said, well, you know, your mother showed that the macroeconomists were saying that globalization would destroy the artisanal industry in Indonesia, the group that she was studying. But she showed that, in fact, the artisanal industry under globalization flourished. So I said, you know, I'm not going to be able to tell you the way the world looks from 30,000 feet like a macroeconomist, but I've been on the ground doing development my whole adult life. I'm going to be able to tell you how it works on the ground. And so he looked at me and he said, I get that. And later, at a social event, somebody asked me how this happened, and he happened to be sitting there. And I told the story, and he goes, yeah, that was one of the best ploys to get a job I've ever seen. You know, read the president's mother's dissertation. But I came by it honestly.
Okay, so let's shift back to a little bit to the private sector, where you left again.
Yeah.
Public sector came to the private sector. You know, your primary foci today is infrastructure, with global infrastructure partners who are kind enough to support this event, so thank you. And then also through mental health, with TwoBridge. So what was, just before we get to the opportunity, what was your primary motivation to shift from public to private sector?
So my colleagues Bruce McLennan and Mark Levitt are here, supporters of the conference. So you know, I learned some really important lessons at the World Bank, but one of them was that the greatest success story in lifting people out of poverty were really China, Vietnam, other countries like that just embraced the market in ways that were really unprecedented. And you know, the Chinese, and you know, there's a lot of tension now, so I don't want to comment on that. But when I was there talking to them, their commitment to letting market forces determine, you know, lots of different aspects of the economy, and the way that they approached poverty alleviation was just really impressive to me. Also, where infrastructure, and at GIP, we do energy, we do now digital infrastructure, we do transport and water and waste. Those essential elements of infrastructure are the key to helping other countries go down this have this experience of lifting so many people out of poverty. China lifted 800 million people out of poverty, unprecedented in human history. And so I knew that infrastructure was key. But I also knew that there was nowhere near enough money in the public sector to support the needs. 60% of all infrastructure spending will be in the emerging markets, and there's just no way that private sector that the public sector would be able to support that. So I left because of GIP, the Global Infrastructure Partners. You know, it's more than 100 billion in assets under management, and the approach is to purchase an asset and then bring the best quality improvement engineers, improve that asset, and then you know, sell it later. But it was the approach that really was so compelling to me, and it just struck me that the approach that GIP has taken is exactly what's needed in developing countries. So I'm working with the emerging market part of that fund. But that lesson was so powerful that, you know, there are just some problems that you can't really take on as you should unless you bring in market forces, unless you bring in private capital. Now, for mental health, it's so different from TB and HIV because systems in every country, the richest country in the world included, every country is broken. So there is a huge addressable market. If we're to believe this study that just came out, half of the population of the world will have mental health problems at some point, then there's a huge addressable market. you can move so much more quickly if you work through the private sector. And so we're looking now at, what's the right platform? How can we bring some of the most promising startups together to be able to solve this problem of triage, to solve the problem of following patients until they find the best treatment for themselves? We think that something like that in the private sector could really disrupt the system. Create a level of care, a level of improved outcomes that will force every healthcare system to take notice.
So a lot of people share your view, and a lot of people shared your view, particularly during the pandemic when mental health issues spiked. What we also saw was like the emergence of all of these technology companies that were effectively trying to address mental health issues, and a lot of them were created and launched, and then a lot of them failed. And it seems that the market hasn't gotten smaller, so why have they failed? And what opportunities are actually available for investors that are more enduring or persistent?
So there were a lot of great companies that got started, and I think there was a point when there was huge amounts of investments, and you saw companies going from zero enterprise value in 2019 to $5 billion, almost overnight. And they were addressing a real need. So one way to look at it as investors is there are a lot of great opportunities now because a lot of these companies have lost 90% plus of their value. But I think one of the problems is that in so many cases, they thought that technology was what was going to fix the problem. And so with Harris especially is a long-time healthcare operator. And the way that our minds came together is, it's really not a technology issue, it's a healthcare problem, right? And so I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and said, hey, tuberculosis, the way to fix it is technology. Have some kind of device that can remind people to take their medicines. And there's been some success, but there's no other way to do it other than to do what we call directly observed therapy. You got to go and actually watch them take their medicines because compliance drops after the first dose, literally, in every case. HIV, the same thing. The notion that you can take care of everybody in Africa with community health workers and laptops, it just doesn't work that way. So I think one of the problems is just a fundamental misunderstanding that it's really, technology can't fix all your problems. Hey, look, I have great hopes that AI and all the new technology are going to help us, but it's really what my partner, Paul Farmer, called accompaniment. You need people-to-people interaction, and in fact, in mental health more than anything else. So I think we have to really expand our notion of who the mental health workforce is, and I think we have to start with what is the care that we need to provide? Who can provide that? And how can we make sure that those people have the resources to actually provide that care?
So you talked a little bit about global infrastructure partners and particularly where you're focused on. If we could delve a little deeper and get a little more specific on the mental health side. And Harris Schwartzberg was here, who I've recently gotten to know, incredible, very successful entrepreneur, philanthropist, and very passionate about this issue. And together, TwoBridge that you guys run, how specifically are you looking to tackle the problem? And how could capital be mobilized if everyone in this room participated in that problem?
Yeah. Well, so I'm sure there are people. I hesitate to do this, but how many people in this room are like 1 degree of separation or less from somebody suffering from mental illness? It's always like this. It's just about everybody, right? So, we're strategizing right now. We're strategizing right now about what to do. But our thinking right now is that, it takes time to build these platforms to do something like, virtual therapy. But we learned some really interesting things about virtual therapy. It's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good, right? So to the point where now the American Psychoanalytic Society, which is 7 years on a couch right next to me, right? They've now approved that you can do virtual therapy to become licensed as a psychoanalyst. So virtual therapy could be really, really powerful. Even asynchronous virtual therapy for young people could be really helpful. So we're looking for someone or some entity perhaps that's built a platform that we can start with. And that platform, then, if we could get lots of these other really successful startups that are doing single things, what they tell us is that the problem is that we don't know where to get patients from. And then when patients come to us who we're not right for, but we want to refer somewhere else, we don't know where to send them. So if you could build a platform and bring these other really successful startups together on that platform, I think that's what you need to get started. And it wouldn't be perfect, but this notion that you're going to build something that has a triage system, these startups are not really doing that. They're not. Nobody's thought, okay, let's actually solve the initial problem, which is, somebody's got to take charge and follow them all the way through the process, just like we do in every other medical field. Yeah. So we're in the process of looking and thinking, and we're just very open to working with folks in this room to see how we can build something that will be so different and provide so much better care that it will force the system to change.
And is there any specific advice that you might offer for, again, investors and families that are in this room for how to think about capitalizing on both this challenge and the opportunity, because presumably it carries some of both, or what roles that we could play in maximizing our own impact in reducing mental health in our communities?
Yeah, let me talk about from very simple to maybe sort of higher level. So on a really simple level, and I feel like I have to apologize. I'm a global health person. I just didn't know these things before. There's something called psychological first aid, right? And I only heard about it literally at our Two-Bridge offices when we went, and Harris already knew about it. I'd not heard about it. And psychological first aid is like CPR, what lots of kids and lots of people learn, cardiopulmonary resuscitation, but for people who might be at risk of committing suicide. So psychological first aid is a very straightforward training program where people are taught how to recognize others who might be at risk for committing suicide. There are a very specific set of questions that you ask that person. There are a very specific set of things that you do to try to make that person feel that they're not alone. And then there's a very specific process of asking for more help. Now, I thought, oh my God, I was president of Dartmouth, and we did alcohol education. When I was there, we implemented sexual assault education, but we never trained people in psychological first aid. And my immediate thought was, my God, every high school, college student, certainly college student, every college student should be trained in something like this. Dartmouth, during my 3 years, no suicides. 10 years before that, no suicides. Last year, 8 suicides in 1 year. Suicides are almost like an infectious disease. That sometimes what we hear is that some kids they hear about an incident of suicide on campus and they think, oh, so there is a way out of my pain if I just have the courage, right? So these things happen, but what if we had every kid on every college campus looking at their friends and looking around differently, trying to find the people who might be in trouble? I think it would change the whole tenor of the campus. Sure. So that's a simple, straightforward thing. It seems like no-brainer. Long-acting injectables for people with psychosis. I mean, 8% versus 40%. There are things that we can do that could change, change the dynamics of a particular disease process right away. But I think we have to think together, right? One thing I used to tell the folks at the World Bank, they'd always come and they'd say, Jim, you got to come to our meeting, right? You got to come to our meeting, you got to give a speech. I said, why? Well, because if you don't, then they're going to think that the World Bank's not committed to something. So what I would say is, okay, now I understand that's your problem, right? You want to demonstrate that you can bring the president to your meeting. But I'm really not going to go just to solve your problem. What do we need to do to solve the problem? What is the problem? Yeah. And I think that's the discussion we need to have. How do we solve the problem? And the problem is no triage system. The problem is no long-acting injectables. The problem is basic things like psychological first aid for all college students. We don't have that yet. Yeah. So if we can figure out what the platform is that really finally takes a stab at solving the problem, then I think I would feel like, oh my God, we've started something. You know, the HIV treatment access in Africa required a social movement. I think that's what we need. So everyone can participate in the social movement, but I think the thing that will really flip the script is if we build something that demonstrates a level of competence, a level of caring, a level of follow-up in mental health care that just hasn't existed before.
Yeah. Now, it's fascinating. I mean, I've learned so much from this conversation already, but in terms of like all of us, in the spirit of what we can learn from you, I mean, you know, I look at your bio, high school quarterback, basketball point guard, top golfer, valedictorian, MD, PhD, prominent doctor, financier, academic. If my mother was in the room, she would have said, if only you got an accounting degree, you could have made something of yourself. But
well, we've been saying, Mo, you know, you built this. That's amazing.
No. But
you were far more successful at your age than we were. I mean, you know, we were still students when we were.
It's very kind and inaccurate. But but in all seriousness, in terms of what values or traits or capabilities, and I was asking you this earlier, do you attribute to becoming who you are? And you know, what parts of Jim Young Kim can all of us adopt?
Well, so my mother tells me that when I was 8 or 9 years old, I would watch Martin Luther King speeches, right? And you know, my brother and sister tell me that they remember too that I would sit in front of the television, I would cry. You know, when I saw all the protests that were happening in 1968, I asked my mother, Mom, why aren't you out there protesting like these other people? And she said, because I'm taking care of you, you little brat, right? So I had some sense that you know, you have to make the world right, tikkun, right? This you know, heal the world. I think I had that sense since I was pretty young. But then, you know, having the longest losing streak in the nation as a quarterback, it gave me a sort of a competitive urge. And you have to have a little of that.
Yeah.
You have to be able to say, no way you're going to tell me that something's not possible. So maybe it's those two things together.
Okay. I suspect it's more than that, but we'll get into it. I know we only have a few minutes left. I have put a couple of our speakers through a little bit of abuse earlier today, where I basically said, I'm going to give you a lightning round. I'm just going to ask you questions. Please don't overthink it.
Okay.
Just first thing that comes to mind. So, favorite hobby?
So it's gotten down to golf. And I wish I could do lots of other sports, but golf is the only one I have now.
Speaking of which, you'd never answered my question. But Obama or Trump, who's the more honest golfer?
Oh, well, there's absolutely no question about that. But I'll let you look it up on Google and you can find out. You know, President Obama, I played with him over many years now. He's probably the most improved golfer I've ever seen. He went from like an 18 handicap to, I think he's like a 7 now. Yeah. So he's actually really gotten better. President Trump is actually a really good golfer, but then there are the other issues.
Right. He might soon have a lot of time on his hands, so who knows. Favorite quote or expression, or maybe favorite mantra word in another language?
Yeah, so you warned me a little bit about this. So let me say it, and probably people understand. A very famous revolutionary said in Spanish, déjeme decirle, a riesgo de parecer ridículo, que el verdadero revolucionario está guiado por grandes sentimientos de amor.
I got it.
Yeah. Let me say, at the risk of appearing ridiculous, that the true revolutionary is guided by great sentiments of love, right? So I don't agree with a lot of other things that this guy said, but this, I think it's true. I mean, I think the revolutions that we were involved with in healthcare were at root our sense that, you know, the people that we were working with, the people that we were serving, you know, deserved care just as much, if not more, than anyone else that we took care of in the great hospitals in Boston.
Yeah, fantastic. Other than longest football losing streak, what record do you think you have a shot at beating? World record.
So unfortunately, I think one of them, you know, the work that I do at GIP is really exciting. But I've made, I think, 17 trips to Asia this year, 9 trips to the Philippines because we're working on trying to get the concession for the Manila airport, which would be great. But my goodness, you folks in the private sector, travel is different, right? I used to be able to plan everything out, but now it's you gotta follow the deal. So it's very exciting. It's very educational. But my God, those trips to Asia now, a 16-hour flight is no big deal for me.
Okay, world record of miles. Got it. Ways in which you might frustrate your loved ones.
I think especially my kids and my wife are like, oh my God, now another movement that you're telling us is the most important in the world. But and so I worry. Oh, Dad, we've heard this before. Oh yeah, 25 million dying again. Right? But the other day, my younger son, who's a high schooler, came up to me and said, Dad, you seem to be resting a bit, but don't you have to go out and take on something? I don't know why he said that to me, but it taught me that they're watching and they are cheering for me, I think, quietly.
Yeah, exactly the same conversations we have at our dinner table. Two more. One, what will it take for you to nominate me for the MacArthur Genius Fellowship? You don't have to answer that. But what will never make you... No, please. What will never make your Wikipedia page?
Well, so what I've learned is that there's nothing that doesn't make it to my Wikipedia page. That I didn't, at times when there were people that I had to let go at Dartmouth or the World Bank, their opinion of me seemed to make it to my Wikipedia page pretty quickly.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jim Yong Kim.